Hey everybody, Eric here. Thanks for waiting. Took me a minute to make sure that the settings were correct, so we're a couple minutes behind. But anyway, we're here. I threw in the chat, Colin, can you? Okay, cool. I'm gonna just double check and make sure that everything's going through okay, that you can hear me, and then we will get started. Yes, you can see me. Thank you, Colin. Can you hear me? All right, well, I'm going to assume that you can until I hear otherwise. So I'm just going to get going. I don't like dead air time. Nobody does. So thanks everybody for joining me. It's a bit short notice, but it is a rainy day here in San Luis Obispo. And I thought, you know what? Even if we don't get too many people, we'll stream it. It'll be online. It'll be available for everyone later. And let's just do some fun stuff. So as you guys are coming in, I'll say hi to a few of you. If you're in the chat, go ahead and comment. Patrick, Colin, of course. And we'll see what we can do today. Now, let me shrink myself down because I can't model like this. I'm going to be blocking most of the screen. So give me a second. I will change my settings and shrink myself down. So great. Is there a delay in my, there's a delay in my audio? Is that what you're saying, Colin? Well, there might be a little bit of a delay. Sorry about that, you guys. I'm going to go for it. It's kind of hard to troubleshoot in real time. Just kind of bear with me, and hopefully it doesn't throw things off too much. So what is it that I want to do today here with you? I want to do a master plan. What that means is that, here, let me double check, make sure I close some settings out here. Okay. So what it means is that we need some information from SketchUp that we're going to use. We're going to compile some things together to create an aerial. Delay from when I speak to when you see it. Colin, I don't know how to fix that. So yeah, I can see there's a delay on my screen. I don't want to restart the stream because then I have to repost the whole, we've got to redo the whole thing. I don't think I've built. Let me just check really quick. Nope. It says my audio is good. Colin, this is why I need like somebody here with me so you can help me. So I just gotta do it, and if it doesn't work, I'll have to dump the stream and we'll have to do another one. So I hope I hope you guys can follow along with me. I don't know how to fix it on your end, but I'm just gonna jump into it, and yeah, let's go for it. So what I want to do is do an aerial master plan, and I need some information first. So I want to start in Google Earth, which is where I want to tell you kind of where we are in the world. And so here we are is in California. So that's where I am. And I thought, well, I'm just going to do something close to me. We're going to do a master plan. I have to pick a site. It's not a real project, but I'm going to pick something that's close to home. If you don't know where I am, it's San Francisco here, LA here, San Luis Obispo is right smack dab in the middle. And I did not go to this Cal Poly. I went to the other, studied landscape architecture. But there's a really cool campus up in the hills with some views to the mountains. And I thought this would be a really good site because what it does is it has some challenging information. It's on topography, there's multiple buildings, there's some natural features that weave in and out. And I think what I wanted to do was come up with my own version of like a campus master plan. So it doesn't really matter which project or site we're doing. It's just something that has enough information that we can pull from. So let me go really quick without spending too much time and just kind of walk you through what we're going to do together today. In the agenda, which is that we're going to start by building the model. And by building the model, we're not going to be necessarily doing a ton of modeling from scratch, because when we're working at this scale, we're really, thinking about things very simple and high level. And it's about bringing information together and about controlling and manipulating that information so that it displays the way that we want. And what we'll do is from there, maybe do a little bit of custom modeling for pieces that are missing, or for some entourage elements that we want to call attention to. But really, this is about bringing information in to form the base of our model, which is the terrain, the ground plane. There's 3 different places we could go for information. I know I have my favorites. Maybe you have yours. And then we're going to look for the buildings. Same thing. There's some different places we can get building information from without having to go in and model each one. And then we're going to go look at the ground plane context, so which is this information that we are going to use that not necessarily model, but we want in the model so that when we export, we can color over the top of it, and we can actually use the hand sketch to cheat a lot of the modeling effort. So things that we just need in the model as a reference, and align it to the view that we're going to use, and then deciding whether we want to bring in some background context. So something that is bigger than the model, like something that might be in the distance. And then from there, we're going to throw up some views or view, style, export, and then hand sketch over the top of it. So see if we can do that together. If you have any questions in the chat, or post them. And again, if you have a question, if you're not watching live, you can still post a comment below and I will get to it. So now we know where we are in the world. We know kind of a scope of work, which, we could essentially model this process that I'm using. There's no limit to scale. So we could do the whole city if we wanted to, we could do the whole region, or we could do something like just maybe if we were working on this project where they're building an extension to the campus and they're building some new dorms, we could just do that as well. It really just depends on what we want to show. So in Photoshop, I've already put together Patrick says, the delay I mentioned was from the time Eric says something until we hear it. The audio is good. Okay, thanks, Colin. I put together just some base map information that we're going to need. So starting with in Google, this is a Google Earth aerial. It's fairly high res, even though I know that SketchUp is going to downsample it. So if we wanted to, we could have 2 resolutions, one for the whole site. And if we were working on just a portion of the site, like if we wanted to really have detail in one area, we could have 2 different scales so that we don't lose that image resolution. But I wanted to get something fairly high resolution because there's going to be things that I'll either want to place trees manually, or we'll go in and hand sketch those. And then the second part is where we want to get possibly the height map information from. So now we could do add location. Problem with that is it's going to tile a large area. We could do CAD mapper. Problem is the resolution is going to be relatively low. Or we could come in and do something like a height map. So you guys have seen, I'm not going to go into detail on where you can get this because I've done this video recently and several other times. It's kind of my go-to method. And when we have a height map, one with labels, so I kind of know how to align it with the aerial, and then one without, like for example, I'll use the labels just so that I can kind of get a sense of where things are. Like for example, I know that these are roads, and so I could say, okay, there's a creek, there's a road. It's not perfect, it's not 100%, but it's close enough that when I lay my information on top of the terrain, things will line up and hit. So I have one version with labels and one version without. And it's because I don't want the labels when I go to create the terrain. And then lastly, I threw this image here of a land use plan. Now, I don't know that we need this, but I like to start with more information rather than less. So for example, if I knew that these orange is classrooms or academic buildings, and yellow were residential, I might treat those a little bit differently when I go to do the final rendering. And then if I looked at also something like agricultural facilities, again, residential, operational, a welcome center, I might call attention to some of these buildings a little bit different. So since I have that information, I might as well put it in here, and then I can bring it into SketchUp and decide what to do with it. So let's start with the aerial. I'm going to save this out and we're just going to call as a JPEG. And we're just going to call this, I'll call this the Google Earth. So this is all, a lot of this part is just, this first part of this process is just getting information into SketchUp. So I've already kind of shortcut it a little bit by going in online and grabbing some information. For example, you didn't, we don't necessarily need to do every single one of these steps together unless you want to, but looking for land use plans, seeing if there's anything in 3D Warehouse before I get too far, coming in and grabbing some information in CAD Mapper, which is an open source, free up to a certain size, and then also grabbing a height map from a website. And I'll put some of the links to these resources down in the description after the stream. So I kind of did a little bit of that legwork already. Hang on, let me just close this one here, keep the other one up. And now we're just going to save these out. The height map, though, here's the trick. We don't want to save this height map at 8,000 pixels, which is the size of the aerial. That's not going to work. So what we're going to do is actually copy the height map, come in here. Actually, it might be easier just to change the image size temporarily. So I'm going to bring this all the way down from 8,000 to 500 pixels. So if you looked at it really close, it might look pixelated. Don't worry about it. That's actually okay because we want this low res. So I'm going to call this height, and I'm going to put this as 500 just as a reminder that that's the number of pixels I'm using. And there we go. I don't need the one with the labels. Again, that was only a reference to so I can line everything up. So I know that the aerial and the height map are hitting each other at the same place. And then I'm going to put this land use plan in just for reference. We may or may not need it. So I'm going to call this one land use. And I'm going to save that to my Cal Poly folder. And now we're ready to go into SketchUp. So that was the fun part. That was the data gathering part that I sort of compressed for you. So what we need first is, I'm going to bring the Google Earth aerial in first. And I'll tell you why, is because I want to scale this. When you export a Google Earth image, if you look closely, if you don't crop the image, you'll see that it has a scale bar on it and a north arrow. So you want to make sure the north is facing up when we export, and we want to make sure that we're looking straight down. And we want to make sure that we have that scale bar on there when we export. And I'm just going to come over here and say 700 feet. I'm going to work in imperial units instead of metric today. And when I zoom out, then my person, my scale fig, can get rid of her. I don't need her for this. I'll double check the scale just to see if this worked correctly. I know that a typical parking stall is going to be about 18 to 20 feet. So I might just double check something like that and say, and if you look down at the bottom corner, 17 foot 11 inches. I think that is close enough. I'm going to call that good, but if that was off, I may want to go back and try scaling this again. Before we get any further, let's go ahead and save this to, we'll call this Cal Poly. Again, we could use this process for anything. We're showing you how all this information is available online for free, except for CAD Mapper. If you're doing a very large site, anything under 1 square kilometer is free. Anything larger is going to come at a small cost. So let's do the train, and then we'll go get some buildings, and then we can start to compose, figure out what else we need. There's a great extension by TomTom. If you do the height map method for the large terrain areas, like I am, what you want to do is use this extension that's called Mesh from Height Map, free from TomTom. And what it's going to do is it's going to say, I'm going to browse to the height map that I want. And for some reason, this does this to me. It comes in backwards, and it's just, maybe it's because it doesn't like coming in at the origin point. And then I'm going to come over here, and this vertical scale is the biggest challenge, is that it doesn't know what the vertical scale should be. So you kind of have to determine that. So what we're going to do is something that I didn't do in my preparation for this, is figure out how tall this should be. So what I'm going to do is, we're going to finish this step here, and then what I'm going to do is show you how we can get some information so that we can scale this vertically along the z-axis properly. So if I come over here to Google Earth Pro, and I know that I have this mountain range that sort of sits right behind, like this little saddle behind Cal Poly, So if I come over here and I say, I want to draw a path, and I want to draw a path from here to say here. And then what I want to do is show the elevation profile of that path. And this is my, I'm going to call this down and dirty way to do it. There may be other ways, or maybe better ways. But what we're going to do is double check here that when we see that we are at the very top of this peak, oh my gosh, it's almost like I planned this. It's exactly 1,000 feet. And remember, this is 1,000 feet above sea level. So that if I were to go down to this football stadium here, which is where the other end of my profile line touches, this kind of parking lot, you can see that that's at 305 feet. So again, we're not looking for perfection here. We're just looking for close. So the difference between, say, 300 feet and 1,000 feet is 700. So that's what we're going to use as a reference point, because I don't really know where sea level is. 300 feet is, well, it's pretty close to sea level. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out in my terrain where those 2 points are, because I didn't export this map with that line in it. So I'm going to explode this. I'm going to sample my aerial. I'm going to come into my terrain group. Sounds like I'm saying train, like choo-choo train, but I'm really trying to say terrain, just doing it fast. Hi, Mihai. Welcome, my friend. I don't know what time it is where you are, but I'm glad to have you with us. I wanted to do some landscape stuff. Mihai asked me about some landscape, and we were not going to get like into detailed landscape, but there's a lot of overlap with planning at this scale and landscape. It's just that we're not going to get into like the super fine granular sort of grading. Okay, so I know that this here, so I'm just going to kind of draw a line from here, and I'm going to push this up along the what is this, the Z, and I'm going to pull it, I'm going to kind of draw this straight line across to the top of this mountain peak here. Remember where that was, where we were? And I'm just going to stop that line there. Now, okay, that line there, that should be 700 feet. Now, if I were to measure it, I would see that that's 623 feet. So I'm actually pretty close. When I pulled up the Z-plane, 10 p.m. All right, that's what time it is in Europe, in Mihai's part of the world. Well, it's not too late. You can stay with us a little bit longer. So what I really want is this line here to be, if I were to go up, let me see, it's a little tricky to see where this line hits that football field or that parking lot. I'm going to bring this up to 700 feet, right? So I got that little bit more on top of it. And then I'm going to take this whole group here, and I'm going to make sure that, now this is where it gets a little bit, I got to think about this here, because I almost want to find like the high point. Because if I just scale this here along the, if I scale this, where's my center grip? I'm actually just going to, I think it's going to be easier if I'm only like 20 feet off. I think for what we're doing is probably better to just leave it than it is, because right now I should be getting a center grip to scale from, and I don't know why. I could quit SketchUp. Let's do that. Let's quit it. Let's see if we can just refresh it and get that center grip that I can then scale and make sure that the top of our terrain is sort of hitting that line. All right, let's try that again and see if that works. Oh, I'm still losing my center grip. I'm going to ask Colin that one. Colin, you can put a little note that like when I hit scale and I want to pull up on the Z axis, like I did when I first brought this train in. I don't know why I can't do that. Let's see if I can do it inside the group. Yeah, I can do it inside the group, but not outside. Weird. Okay. So I can kind of use this, if I needed to come up a little bit. Now remember, I'm using a scale factor, so that may or may not be as accurate as when you enter in like 23 feet and you get that feet. So Colin says he's going to check into why I couldn't scale on the outside of the group, and I'm scaling on the inside. You can see here I've got my spinning beach ball. Like I think when you're scaling to me the loose geometry, it takes more processing power. Could be wrong. And so hopefully it's not too bad. It just takes a second to kind of finish that, bringing all that terrain information up. It's pretty high detailed. I didn't show you the resolution, but even at 500 pixels on that height map using the bitmap to mesh, it's putting in a lot of terrain information. I'm going to show you because we're going to grab it from a different source in just a second when this beach ball is done. And if it takes more than 30 seconds, I'm just going to, again, we're only a few feet off. I'm just going to quit it and we'll start over. In fact, I'm probably just going to do that anyway because I didn't make any changes, so I'm not going to lose anything. I'm just going to go with what I had before. And that's okay. That is okay. All right. So like I said, I want to compare the level of detail in this terrain. If I turn my hidden geometry on, you can see it's pretty dense. It's really nice because also if you turn on, I have my shadow setting set to not really show the shading. But if I were to, let's see here, change the time of day. Let's see here. There we go. Okay, I'm trying to find, I just wanted to kind of show you, give you an example of whether or not this is more information or this could be too much or too little. You can see that you get a lot of these little subtle nuances, like these little ridge lines. And you can also see where the campus is. The campus has been graded sort of into the slope. So the whole thing like sits on this, almost like the toe of this mountain slope. And that may or may not be important depending on the level of detail that we're working. And you're going to see I want to compare that in just a second to another, let's see here, to another place that you can get some terrain information, which is an open source site called CAD Mapper. So I mentioned that here in a minute. One place was Tangram's Height Mapper, and the other one is what's called CAD Mapper. So CAD Mapper, again, is free up to 1 kilometer, and it's only a few dollars. If you're bigger than that, that's okay, usually worth it. And then, so you can see I get some terrain information. One thing I'm limited here to, I'm limited to what I'm willing to pay for. For example, I don't really need the terrain. I really just want the buildings because that's to me where the buildings and the roads and stuff, that's where the value is. And the topography, I'm not too worried. I can get that from another source. So let's go ahead and compare what that looks like. That level of detail looks like compared to what we just did. So if I turn my hidden geometry on in this CAD mapper, this is that sort of open source information, you can see that same slope. It's pretty broad brush stroke. An aerial master plan, when you're looking down on it, it might be okay. But again, I want to usually start with as much information as I can. So let's spend 2 minutes or 3 minutes to clean this up. We don't have to do very much. My process is really simple. Start with turning on color by tag, and then come in here and just change the colors of the color by tag overrides. And what this does is it kind of very quickly shows you what is on what tag. And by default, the profiles come in pretty thick at 3. So I'll bump those to 1, maybe lighten up the lines slightly. We're going to merge this into my other file here in a second, so it's not like I need to have this perfect, but it's just, it helps to kind of style it a little bit and organize it. The other thing it does is it comes in not everything on a group. So one quick way to do that is to select everything on the same tag, and then you can group it. And now all of a sudden all the buildings are on the buildings tag. And I'm going to rename that. I'm just going to go with S. S is for SketchUp. And the reason why I do that is because sometimes I work with other information. So having the S always keeps the SketchUp information organized. What I want to do is select all the roads. So these are all like the medium-sized roads. Group those. And then I want to come over and find all of like the wide roads, like the arterials. Select all on the same tag. I'm going to group those. And then I'm going to select sort of the parking lots and the arterials. And I'm going to group those together. And I'm also going to come over here and select the paths and group all those together. So now I've got paths I've got paths and roads separate. I'm going to leave those separate. So S path, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the minor roads. I'm going to put them on the major roads tag and just combine them into one group called S roads, or whatever you want. Streets. Railways, I don't know if I need that. I'm going to keep it because there is a rail that goes through here. You can see if I switch it to a dashed line, there is a rail corridor, and that may or may not be something that is information that we need. So I'm going to save that there. And there's also water. So if I clicked on water, I would change this to a different line type. I want to make sure I select all in the same tag and I group that. I'm going to call this L water, and the reason why is because there's not 3D geometry. I'm also going to call this L, like almost like a CAD line work. L for landscape, or L for just simple line work. So all the water and all the rail, I could combine those together if I wanted to, group those together, get rid of the rail tag, put it on the water tag, and then just call it L, what do you call it? I'm just going to call it line work. I already know that that's okay. So that's it. So now I can grab all this stuff and I'm going to group that together, copy it, pop over here, and we're going to paste it on top of our aerial. One thing I like to do is I like to work above too sometimes. So what I'll do is I'll copy this aerial and then I'm going to work above, and then we can drop stuff down onto the ground. So let's do some organization as we go. I'm just going to X image. I call it X because it's something I'm going to freeze. So X means don't show this. X image aerial, or I can call it Google Earth. That's not really the important part. And then the next thing I want to do is put this terrain on its own layer. So I'm going to go with S terrain, and then I'm going to paste my CAD mapper group. I'm probably going to have to adjust this a little bit because my terrain is more detailed than the terrain that I got from CAD mapper. That might be the only problem that we have with this method. So let's line things up, and we can kind of see where the discrepancy in levels of detail are in just a second. So let me look for a building here that I know. This building here is the one I used to teach in, which is right here. That's the landscape architecture building. So if anyone knows Cal Poly SLO, you'll know, maybe you know that building. Okay, so you see things don't line up perfectly. So I have to kind of think about that for a second. Camera, I'm going to double check to make sure I'm in parallel projection. The only thing I can think of if things don't line up is that my scale, even though I checked it, is a little bit off. And I don't like that, but I think this is the time to fix it. So what I'm probably going to do is I'm probably just going to make some little manual adjustments really quick. So let me hit X. I can do two choices. I can either scale the CAD mapper information or I can scale my terrain information. I think the open source CAD mapper information is going to be more accurate. So what I'm going to do is just kind of pull this in a little bit. I want this intersection to be right here. So we'll use that kind of as our reference point. So scale. And then what else? We need to look at something else. No, that looks pretty good. Oh man, these are the things where it's like, at some point you have to decide like, nope, that's good enough. We're going to go with it because we're going to fake it anyway. Like ultimately we're going to be redrawing all this stuff. The other thing is you can look at is it may not be a scale issue. It may be a rotation issue. So we might look at something and think, oh, actually that came in at a slightly rotated angle. So if we were to actually pull this in and rotate it, you might see that like, oh, okay, that's the issue. So I'm just going to bring that in. Again, this is a diagram, and this is just kind of a learning experience. If we were really going for super accuracy, I would make sure that we double checked all this. Okay, I'm going to drop this in, but you're going to set a different scale factor, 0.998. So, and if you look at the building footprints, check them. It's like, yeah, a little bit shifted. Yeah, but also remember the buildings come off the ground, so we really want to use something, you really want to use a reference that is lower to the ground rather than a building footprint, because a really high building is not going to line up with its aerial on the ground anyway. So I'm going to just use something that's closer to the ground plane, and I'm going to call that good. Cool. So now here's the hard part is, and let me know in the chat too, if you guys have a different way to do it, or if you have a way, or if you have a different source. I did say that this is only one way to do it. There are different sources of information. For example, Placemaker can bring all this stuff in at once. That's in a paid extension. I'm looking at combining a few different methods here. So now I don't have all of my buildings for all of downtown because that would be more work to get, but I do have most of what I need for campus. And I wanted to just kind of get a sense of like, if I feel like the scale, the sense of scale for what I want to illustrate, because this is only the first part. Finding the information, compiling the information, organizing the information, right? Filtering and organizing and grouping. And then what we're going to do is the next step is to compose the information. So what we're going to do is we're going to be setting up, we're going to continue to model, but we're going to model to a view so that we're not putting time into things that don't show. Okay. So that looks pretty good. Now we're missing a little bit. This is where I made the comment for one thing we need to do is we have a terrain mesh, we have building sugar cubes. And then the other thing is we need to think about, we have the ground plane, which is the Google Earth aerial. I'm going to bring in the land use plan here in just a second, but this is also where we could bring in some design information. So if we were working on a concept master plan, we can actually change the aerial so that the ground plane is different than the information we have right now. I'm doing an aerial rendering as if for what's there now, but obviously this process may be better used for proposing a design. I see something's going to bug me here, and it's these buildings that are made from curves, and they are not softened. So I'm just going to select all of those right now, all the buildings, and we're just going to click soften, and we'll kind of smooth some of those out. So that'll be nice. The coolest thing right now is that oh, okay, cool. There's one more thing we can do that we didn't do it in the CAD mapper, is the park information. So there is, I totally ignored parks. So what I want to do is turn some stuff off, everything except parks. There's not a lot, but there's a little bit. So this is where you got to kind of have to think like, oh man, how do I want to do this? Because it's a little bit of a process that if this is important to have these parks with faces, right now they don't have faces. They are clear, transparent. They're just lines. So you can't use NROT's. Normally what I would do is use NROT's face creator, but I can't do that here because we're not dealing with flat information. So we could flatten all these parks and then drape that onto the surface of the terrain and color those, or we could come over here and do something like Tool Palettes Sandbox, and then just do Sandbox. And then the problem with that is that, again, depending on the level of accuracy, you may need to go in and clean that up. So if I hit my color by tag override and I turn my parks to green, you can see that by taking the 2 seconds that it took to sandbox it, I now have a surface that is green. So I'll do that for a couple more, but it may not be worth the work. Sandbox from contours, and then I would explode, and then maybe invert selection, select, invert selection, group, and delete. So group those little extra bits. Again, if we're going to be coloring this by hand, then we may just need the line work for the parks. And then in Photoshop, we could select everything outside of that, invert the selection, and then fill it with green, right? So there are ways we can get around, we can cheat that. The question is whether or not we benefit from having geometry in the model. If it's geometry, it can be manipulated. We can add shadows. We can paste textures onto it. But if it's just a solid color, we can also do that later when we go to render. So I'm just going to do a couple as an example for how we can get around that problem, why the parks weren't showing. Like for example, when I turn all of this stuff back on, let's see here. I'm going to do the terrain. This is my color by tag and my buildings and my line work. Okay. I'm going to save that, and I'm just going to save right now. I'm just going to save a scene. I don't really need a scene, but if I wanted to, I could save a new style in this color by tag mode, color by tag style, and I could create a new scene, and I might just like go color by tag. And then what it does is it just lets me, I'm just going to call this working, like a working scene, and then decide whether or not, so kind of really quickly, I can use the color by tag without having to go in and color all that geometry. One thing that with CAD Mapper, if you get the information from an open source like that, or even from GIS, from other places, is that they often build their meshes off center lines. So what it means is that two center lines that come together, it rounds the center line out. So you can see these paths have these circles and round edges, and they crisscross each other. And so depending on the scale that we're working, we may not want to see those. So what I'm going to do is start with just the paths. And there's a great extension by Fredo called Hide All Edges. Of course, you can do this with native tools, but I'm just going to hide the edges of the path. If you have a lot of information, this can take a minute to process, so be patient. And again, we're getting close. We're going to remember the next part of the process is we're going to compose a camera view. We're going to finish modeling to view, and we're going to stylize the exports, and then we're going to go and export. So again, depending on, since I'm using the color by tag override, depending on the colors, for example, if I wanted to export this to Photoshop using the colors, then what I can do is I don't need the edges, because you can select by color range in Photoshop, or you can, if you export as individual pieces, then you can, like for example, if I turned all the edges off, let's see what happens if I turn, just for humor me here for a second, we'll just turn all of our edges and all of our profiles, and then we'll come over here to our shadow settings, and we'll do 80 and 0, and you can see what happens is that the buildings disappear. I'm just going to add this scene really quick. You can see that the buildings disappear, but they block, what's kind of cool is they block the roadways, but they're like masking them. So you wouldn't need to go in and manually clip stuff out later in Photoshop. We could come in here and set up our view the way that we want, and we don't really need the edges for this, because it's really like, think about it like a diagram. All right, so guys, still with me? It is kind of cool though. It's kind of cool actually to see the park colors, and by use the color by tag mode, what's really fun about this is that if I change the color of the parks, if I want to lighten those colors, I just change the color of the color by tag override, and it changes all of them. So in that way, you could, if it's worth it to do some work here in SketchUp, then what we can do is save ourselves some time later. We actually won't have to do that coloring in Photoshop. So it really just depends on how you want to do it. Yes, thanks, Mihai. So let's get out of SketchUp. Let's get into Photoshop. Let's spend a few minutes and set up what we want to do. I'm going to set up my working view here, and we are going to export some stuff. I'm going to take a quick tangent, and I'm going to open up a new file, and excuse me, not a new blank file, a new from template. Because I actually do have a template, and it's called styles. So I've actually built a template that has a composition grid built into it. It has a watermark sky, so the sky is in the background. I know that SketchUp 2026, you can actually use environments. I'm actually on SketchUp 2024, so I'm using my old school method as far as putting a sky in the shot. I also have a color, black and white, ambient occlusion, color by tag, shadows, and then just a camera view. So in this case, it actually may make more sense that we come in here and make sure that everything is turned on and unlocked and unhidden. And just take everything and copy it And of course I could have started a new blank file from this if I knew that this is what the direction I was going. And I might actually come in here and edit, paste this in place. So I'm basically pasting my master plan file into a rendering template that I'm going to use for doing my exports. So if I zoom out, what I can see is now we can see what this looks like with, if I were to say, pick this as my camera view. I didn't set any of these as, none of these have cameras, none of these scenes have cameras attached. So like if this is my view, I can automatically export a sky watermark. Could I do that in Photoshop? Of course, but sometimes it's nice to have this information just in the model, and it just kind of helps you visualize like picking camera view before you actually go and compose everything. Do I need a grid? Do I need a composition grid? Probably not for an aerial. It might be something where you look at, where you say, well, what's the most important piece of information? If I'm telling a story about this football field and I want to draw your eye to that football field, I might pick a view that puts that football field on a composition grid. But it's less important in an aerial than it is on a ground. If I was doing a ground plane view, where I could put something like, I could put a person, I could put the horizon line, you know, there's certain things I could put on that composition grid. So there's that, it's in there. And then there's my sky, here's my color. So color is basically like solid color. So sometimes I would use that as a working scene. Sometimes I would export this. I typically wouldn't. You'll notice I didn't color anything. All the CAD mapper information is black and white. I haven't colored anything. I'm using the color by tag override. So in this case, the color, there's nothing I've colored yet. Black and white is just edges. So it's just line work. This is where we have to be careful. So I could either turn the roads off when I export these, or I can hide the road edges because I don't like these overlaps. We did it for the paths, but we didn't do it for the road. The other thing I might do is for this one is I might turn the terrain off. And you can see why here in a second. Some of these buildings are being cut off by the terrain, and some of the roads are being cut off by the terrain. So it's one of those things where it's like you could do X-ray mode and you can see the buildings through. Don't want to do that. I could turn the terrain off. I could see the full buildings. Of course, in reality, some of them may actually be sunk into the slope. So it's kind of like something to think about whether to actually export it. Because in this case, I don't actually need it. It's white. It's just background. My ambient occlusion, it's not showing up. Maybe it's because of the scale that I'm at. I like that in the new, yeah, there it is. It's probably just because the AO doesn't really work at the master plan scale, which is a reason to be using the 2026, because it works when you get in close, but the further out you go, you lose that scale. Right, Colin? You guys fixed that problem with 2026, which is great. So the AO probably doesn't get me anything at that, depending on the scale that I'm working. It's kind of cool. Kind of ghostly, you know, you kind of just pick up like a little bit of it's almost like fog. You pull too far away and you disappear, get up close and it comes back. And then my CBT is there. Now, depending on how I want to do this, I may take the terrain out, or I may give the terrain a different color, just so that it contrasts a little bit. And my shadows. And of course, the shadows are going to be dependent on the time of day. So we probably want to come over here, and before we export, we would go in and play with some different options to make sure that we have shadows that are dynamic and that are really kind of emphasizing, yeah, I would change the shadows to the time of day. So this first one is set up stylistically just so that it's there. But I definitely don't, you know, I would want to make sure I customize that. So let's do it. And then this view is basically like, once you've got everything dialed in, you just update this camera view, and then all the settings for this one view will be done. Save. Desktop. This is Cal Poly styled. I want to get into Photoshop. What about you guys? It says check to see if you're on the new graphics engine. I think I am, Colin. Thank you. And I do think it's use the new graphics engine. Yep. I do think it's that change from 2026, and it's a good change. I'm glad you guys did it. So there we are. Let's do it. Let's export. Now we need to pick the camera view. So if we were doing this as like a diagram, like a map of the Cal Poly campus, we might do orthographic and that's totally okay. But I'm thinking that I'm thinking to have some depth would be kind of cool. The AO ought to work. It does work, but it doesn't work at this scale. So let's see. Let's do color. And by color, what I want to do is actually change that style to, when I say color, what I mean is, what I should mean is color actually should be textured. I don't think I benefit from having just solid colors. So color really is color with textures, textured. I do want that texture. So I actually think we need to decide if we're kind of the story here that we want to tell. This is downtown. Cal Poly is actually really close to downtown. I'm going to hide my aerial for this. I'm sorry, the flat aerial. 26 has an AO scaling factor. Yes, exactly. Thanks, Colin. That's exactly what I was saying. It's the scale factor for the AO. So this is downtown. Where is downtown? Oh, it's over here. You can't see it. It's this freeway. This is the 101 freeway. And so downtown is like right on the other side of this. And there's this really cool mountain right here that you can't see because I didn't export a big enough terrain. But we got to think about the story. If the story is the view from campus out, then a wider terrain context would be important. But as a campus master plan, we often tend not to look out from campus. We tend to look in. It's very much about what's happening on campus. It's very much about how you get from one building to another. How do you park? What are the amenities? Where are the gathering spaces? So to me, I want to kind of find a view that either looks into the site from one side or the other. And also the fact I have to think about the fact that I only have information. Now, can I fake some of this stuff? Yes, I can. But I only have information up to a certain extent. So that's probably going to help me with my decision. I want to see what the shadows look like, because I actually think the shadows are going to help me determine, so I don't want shadows on the ground. Turn those off. Update this. I think that I don't want this shadow being cast here, but I can also clip that out. Yeah, so let's let the shadows kind of determine something that feels, if it's too straight on, it feels a little bit boring. So I kind of like trying to get it at like a 45-degree angle where you can see sort of the mountains in the background, and that's kind of cool. So let's see what we can do there. What do you guys think? I think showing a little bit of neighborhood context so we can see what the major roads are in and out. Like if we were telling there's a road in that comes in this way. There's a road in that comes in this way from the freeway. And then there's this paths and trails and stuff that goes up to, that goes up into this canyon. And so, I don't know. And then this is the agricultural portion of the site. So I think having something centering the heart of the campus in the middle of the frame would be good. So I'm going to update my V1. So now when I click on V1, it stores that camera information. But the settings, the stylistic settings don't store the camera settings. So I can continue to change the camera as much as I want. Now we have to decide how far we want to go with the shadows. We can do it a few different ways. We can do time of year and we can do time of day. And then that will just kind of give us something to work with. We can also look at the sun coming. We can look at the sun coming from both angles. So one was going to be like the buildings are going to be lit from the foreground, and the shadows will be behind them. And sometimes, even though it feels like it makes it darker, sometimes it's more compelling to have the shadows coming towards the camera. It emphasizes the buildings and stuff more. Problem with that is I'm getting the shadow on the terrain. So we can cheat this and select the terrain and come over to entity info and say don't cast shadow, because I don't think it's helping us here. So I'm going to say don't cast shadow from the terrain, and I'm going to just look at only the architecture. And then that way I'm not feeling like, what I don't want to do is, I'm also going to take these paths, the roads and the paths, whoops, not the whole thing. I want to take the roads. I mean, you might want the roads and the paths to cast shadows. because then it's going to make it look like it's floating. So now I'm looking at just architecture. So if I'm looking at just architecture, I feel like I want to go this way. I want to go left, sort of left to right on the screen and do something like that. Okay, I can, this is the problem. I can overthink this to death. I'm going to just go with that. So now, because we've already set up our scenes, all we have to do is export. So what I'm going to do is turn everything off. And this one is going to, I'm going to update this, and I'm just going to call this aerial. So it's just the aerial only. And then the next thing I'm going to do is, this is black and white. Everything's there. Looks great. AO, not going to use on this one. Delete it. Doesn't work for the master planning scale with 2024. Color by tag. Everything is there. That's great. I am going to think about this for a second. I'm going to turn the terrain off. And instead, I'm going to turn the buildings to a bright color. And the reason why is because I want to separate the buildings from the background. So this is really just so that I can use this as like a selection tool. So if I use really bright poppy colors, that's okay. So update that. Shadows, looks good. We've already set those, and we've set the camera angle here, which it should have remembered. What happened? Oh no, don't tell me that messed up and I got to do that again. Oh, where did it go? Where did it go? Window, scenes, check my V1, make sure my camera position is saved. It is. So where did my information go? There it is. Why wasn't it showing? Okay. Let's do it. Let's export. Let's export to Photoshop. Let's do some drawings. We're about 50 minutes in, and I want to do some coloring. So for those that are huge SketchUp fans, that's all we needed. Remember, all we needed was enough information that we can then go work with it somewhere else. So let's get out of here. Let's start with just exporting the aerial. Now I can do a batch export, but I kind of like controlling it just to make sure that, I don't know, there's only 3 of them. There's only like 4 things we need to export. So let's just, we can just do this one at a time. We're going to double check the size. I want to make sure I'm using my view size, but then I want to go a little bit bigger. So let's go 4,000 pixels, maybe even 5,000 pixels. We don't want to go too big. We don't want to make it difficult for us later. Leave the line scaling at 1. Everything looks good. So we're going to use that as our setting. So aerial is exported. This one has the most amount of information. So this one might take the longest. Okay. The black and white lines, we're going to export those. I'm going to turn my roads off. Nope. Turn my train off. Nope. Do I want the road lines? I'm going to turn them off, because here's the thing. I can do them separately. If we really wanted them, we can figure out, we can do it. Oh, there's one more thing I want to do, and that which we can export as a separate layer. So let's export our line work. So we're going to go File, Export, 2D Graphic, Lines. We can call them edges too. Call them whatever you want. And then what I want to do is actually come back over here and turn my terrain on for a second. And there's a great extension I'm going to use, and it's called Contours. I want to slice some contours. And because this is such a big area, I'm going to start with slicing contours at 10 feet intervals. If I do 1 foot intervals, oh my gosh, that's going to be too close. So think about that in you metric folks. That would be like, what, 3 meters about? 3.25? It might take a while. It's a big area that we're slicing through. It's going to run a slice, and it's going to save a contour line for every 10 feet, all the way from 300 to 1,000. Or from 0 to 700, depending on whether we've lifted 3 meter. Yeah, thanks, Mihai. You could do 5 meter, you can do 1 meter. See, the nice thing about meters is if you do 1 meter contours, that's about 3.5 feet. A little less than 3.5 feet. So you can actually do those pretty easily. I hope this doesn't take too long. My advice is normally don't touch anything, just let it go. But sometimes when you're streaming and screen sharing, it kind of like things can interact and mess with each other. So I'm hoping that this doesn't give me any trouble. 10-foot contours should have been fine for the size of space that we're working on. 1, 5, and 10 meters. So if you're doing this in metric system, you might skip the 3 meters. It's a weird number. Go with something even. So 5 meters for us would be like every 15, which makes sense actually. I could have done that and probably the spacing would have been good. So if you think about it, if we're doing every 10 feet, we can do some math while we're waiting. We're going from 300 to 1,000, then that's 700 feet. So that should be about 70 contours, plus or minus, that we're cutting through the site. If this takes too long, I'll kill it because it's not essential for this. For me, when I'm streaming, I'm really conscious of time because it's kind of like being on TV, you know, you don't want dead airtime. And for me, it's like, this feels like dead airtime. But when I'm working by myself, this isn't dead airtime. If it takes a minute to process, whether I'm rendering in V-Ray, whether I'm running a really complex processing calculation, or whether I'm importing or converting or saving information, that's a time for me to stretch. That's a time for me to go get coffee, use the restroom, make a phone call. Like, it's not wasted time. I can go do something else. But when you have everybody watching you, it's like one of those things where it's like, come on, like, can we just speed this process up? I mean, it could be story time where I go back and give an anecdote about something. So I will say though, while this is taking a minute and I may kill it, I may not. I'm going to give it a little bit more time because it shouldn't take too long. I do like the contours because it gives you one more piece of information to work with. Like for example, when I use the aerial, if you're going to do a hand-drawn aerial, what I found is that if you include the aerial like full saturation, it competes with the information that you're drawing over the top of it, your concept design, like where you want your eye to go. And so in a way, it's like if you pull the aerial out, then the question is what do you have to indicate that height? And there isn't really anything that tells you from here. You can kind of see that there's a hill in the background, but there isn't really anything that kind of tells you like where, like the campus is all on a slope. Like this whole thing slopes up and there's like this knoll and then it goes back up again. Or like this plateau. And so without the contours, you wouldn't really know, there's no way to communicate that. And you definitely wouldn't want to try faking it and doing them in by hand. I'm going to kill it and I'm going to do something like 25 and we're going to see if this works. Hopefully I saved it because if I kill it without saving it, then. See, there it is. Something about killing the process, when I kill it, it forces the contours to stop processing. And it's like, why do you do that? Why don't you just stop? You clearly showed me that you can. Okay. Let's try it again. Hey, look at that. Ah, I should have killed it sooner. Okay, so killing it actually was the right thing. I forced it to stop. So we now have contours, which I love contours. Okay, we're going to do those as dashed lines. Do we want to do them as dashed lines? At this scale, here's the thing about these contours is they're a little chunky, and the reason why is that if you turn on the hidden geometry, you can see that this grid mesh that we built, it's fairly, orthogonal. So the way that it cut through these shapes is not super smooth. And there's ways we can get around that, but I'm just going to go for it. So let's go back to our view, and then I'm going to export the contours separately. And the reason why is because I want to make sure that I can control them. And I think 10 feet might have been too narrow. I think 25, probably 25 would have been better. So let's go ahead and turn off everything except the contours, and we'll do those separately. Again, they're a little Minecrafty, they're a little boxy, and just ignore that for now. We'll see if we can make that work. Export, 2D graphic. We're going to go desktop, Cal Poly, and we're going to go contours. Cool. Now we're going to come over here to our color by tag. Color by tag mode is just going to be what we're going to use for selections. Everything else we're going to hand color. Terrain, I don't need because I can get that information from the aerial. Export, 2D graphic. Call this color by tag. And I think that's all. Oh, shadows, and that's it. Last one. File, export, 2D graphic, and shadows. Cool. Sound is good. Thanks for joining. Yes, I think we figured it out. I don't know how or what was wrong, but as long as you guys tell me it's working, welcome. I'm going to come back to this, whether I want to do land use or not. I'm going to leave this open. So what we're going to do is not worry about that right this minute. We can decide. So we're going to come over here to our exports. And I'm only going to grab one first, which is going to be, let's say, shadows. It doesn't matter which one. And the reason why is because when you have one file open and then you grab all the other ones, they retain their names: aerial, lines, contours, color by tag. And then, of course, the first one doesn't. So the first one was that the black and white lines? No, shadows. Great. All right, this is the... So for those, if you just joined, we've left SketchUp. Now, I'm not saying that we won't be back into SketchUp, because SketchUp was going to be the thing that we use to get the information that we can go do the hand drawing. I have some examples that I could have shown, but I think I'm just going to go for it, and I'm going to explain the process as we go. So let's do this. On our shadows, the first thing I want to do is just kind of by default is I want to look at a couple things, which is number one, I'm going to maybe think about, I don't know, I might just crop in now. I'll wait. I'm going to wait to crop in, but I'm already thinking I'm going to tighten this up a little bit so it's not so long. And then, yeah, so let's just go ahead and just go through this. So I'll start with shadows by selecting the color range. I, by default, always just come in here and we'll change. I want to be careful that I don't select because it's kind of a light gray. I will change the shadow color to something that has a little bit of a tone to it. So you'll notice it's subtle, but it's a little bit of a purple tone. And depending on what I'm working on, I may push that, exaggerate it, or not. And for the aerial, I'm going to start by hue saturation. I'm going to start by just lightening the aerial. For right now, I want it in there, but I want to just see it as in context. Okay. So some of these shadows, I wonder if you'd see such a big shadow if it's going up the slope. I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to worry about it right now. Yeah, I want to crop this. I'm just going to crop this now because I think it's going to yeah, I think it'll fit the canvas a little bit better when we're drawing it if it's not so so wide. So contours here, again, I've got those. I've got our lines and I've got our old shadows. I'm going to leave them in there for right now, but you can see here. And I'm also going to create a fill layer so that if I turn my aerial off, I have this fill layer. There's a few tricks. You'll notice like we don't have the buildings for this front edge, but there's some few tricks. We can either crop that or we can do something with towards the end. So here's the nice thing about having the contours is you definitely can see the terrain now. Maybe we want to even start with just right off the bat. We can even, I'm not getting rid of this information, but I'm using the I'm using like a mask, like a layer mask, to just start thinking about areas where I'm like, I don't really want to call attention to there. So maybe we can even just start, yeah. So I'm masking stuff out rather than deleting it, because you never know when you're having to go back in. And by doing this, I'm already kind of starting to pull the emphasis towards the center of the frame. I'll try not to bounce around too much. So we got our lines, our contours, our CBT, and okay. So if I wanted to, this is why I did the CBT, is that I could use this select color range, turn my shadows off. I'm going to turn everything off for a second. Select color range, grab everything that's hot pink, and then this is where we start to use the SketchUp information as the base. So like I might do this as buildings, and I can create my own layer, and I don't know what color I want them to be. I'm going to leave them as white right now, but they can be off-white. And I paste those in. And the cool thing about this is now I have information in Photoshop for the buildings. So if I were to do something like an outer glow, I'm not saying I want to do this yet. I'm just saying that we have now controllable information because we parsed it out. We separated it from the background plane. And I like controllable information. I've got an outer glow. Again, if we wanted to do an inner glow or a stroke or some other things, I don't think we want to bevel. We could do a color overlay. I'm okay with white right now. We could apply a pattern to it. I think right now I'm just going to do the outer glow. And I can darken it or lighten it. The problem with if you go too dark is because the outer glow is uniform, it looks like it's floating. So what you want to do is use that sort of more subtle. And that kind of creates, it almost recreates the ambient occlusion that I didn't get from the scale that I'm working. Next little trick that I want to show you, little pro tip, is that you can also create an ambient occlusion effect using dodge and burn tool with the shadows. So for example, if you, over here in Photoshop, there's this little, what looks like the lollipop, that's the dodge burn. So dodge kind of lightens and burn darkens. So naturally you would have, as a shadow moves away from the site, if I go over here to, let's zoom in here just so you can see a little bit better. As it moves away from the building, it lightens. And the opposite, if I were to burn it, as it gets closer to the bottom of the building, it sort of darkens. This is something you may not want to do at this scale, but it gives a little bit of, it breaks that uniformity of, hey, this came straight from SketchUp, and it kind of creates some highlights and some contrasts, depending on if you want to call attention to a particular area. So you may not want to do it over everything, but if you had like a skyscraper or something and you wanted just to lighten up a shadow, you can just come over here and fairly quickly just soften some of those edges. There's no way to like one-click this and say, hey, I want all of these to be lightened. And this one here, I'm just going to like change that shadow because it's too far. I don't know why those are there. Yep. So again, we're not looking for perfection. We're going to just kind of move quick the rest of this time together for the next hour or so, and then we'll call it. So I'm going to finish dodging. This is a dodgy process. I have this tablet too, a Cintiq tablet, so it's actually pretty easy to do with a pen because it feels very natural, like you're just almost like you're just coming in with an eraser. You're just softening some of these shadows. Gotta decide like whether it's worth it. It's one of those little subtle things that may or may not be worth the time. And I say may or may not because it's ultimately up to you. Like when you're working, you're going to be like, well, if that's 10 minutes of my time, do I think it's worth 10 minutes of my time for the effect that I get to soften these shadows? And yeah, I guess you have to tell me, what do you guys think? What do you guys think in the chat? Do you think that sort of, again, it's not, AO can't do this because AO is doing it, ambient occlusion does it to faces, it doesn't do it to shadows. And until SketchUp allows to have a softened shadow or a shadow fade or a shadow fuzz distance, Colin, if you're there, write that down. If I can soften my shadows, then I won't have to do this in Photoshop. The other way to do this would be to do it in V-Ray, because if you rendered the shadows, you would naturally get a softer edge depending on the size of your light source. So if you were using the sun and you increase the size of your sun multiplier, you can generate this automatically. I'm gonna call it there. Just do a couple more because I think you get the point. Obviously, and the other thing is you can do is you can lighten shadows that are in the background. Like for example, I don't want to get rid of them. I don't want to call attention to these because these are not the most important buildings. These are like little outbuildings. So I could come in here and anything that's sort of outside of my core campus master plan, you know, perhaps I lighten those up a little bit because they're not really where I want to draw your attention to. And we're just making all this up. Like it's not a real project. We're just using this as an excuse to have some fun together. So now, this is where I wish I had more information in the 3D model. I'm going to pause on the shadows for just a second. I'm going to create a new group, and I'm just going to call this my color. So I'm going to keep the lines at the very top. I'm going to keep my color in the middle, and I'm going to put my SketchUp stuff at the bottom. SketchUp is really now my reference. My exports are all been referenced, and I may or may not use them. I may only use them to create information in SketchUp. I'm sorry, in Photoshop now. So shadows, I'm going to pop those in here. I don't need them. I'm just going to keep them. Color. My OCD says color these because then you'll be able to find them easier later. Let's color the roads. So what I'm going to do is come over here to color by tag, and I'm going to go say select color range, and I'm going to grab this dark. This is why I said like the colors that we were using in the color by tag, it's not important because when we get into Photoshop, we can change it to any color that we want. So I'm going to do, in my color group, we're going to create a new group and we're going to call them roads. And this is where we might actually benefit from using a gradient instead of using, let's see here. By gradient, well, obviously you all know what a gradient is. It just means that we're going to do dark on one side and light, and it fades to light on the other. So what we might do is come over here and pull our gradient to something like that, or like that. Or we can invert that and pull it again. So what we're getting is, I don't know, maybe we go light to dark, or we go, yeah, let's go light. Let's go light to dark. Okay, it's a lot. It's a subtle difference, but you can see here now I've got my roads, but I have a gradient attached to them. So it's a little bit lighter over here and a little bit darker in the foreground. And of course, if I want to change the colors of that, because they're in, I'm going to mask, right now it's just a mask, but if I merge that, I now have my roads that I can manipulate. So I can lighten those. I can lighten my roads. Whoops, not saturation because it's black and white. So I can lighten them up a little bit. This is where you can also come in and do the same thing. We can apply some layer styles to them. So I can go and add something like a stroke if I wanted to. If I wanted to bring those edges back, I would want to do the same stroke color that I'm using just to give it like that hand-drawn feel. I could give it an inner shadow. Now, if we zoom in here real quick, probably not going to see it so much at the master planning scale, but if I brought this inner shadow in and gave it a distance of like 2 pixels and follow the same direction of our sun, I don't know if you can see it. It's pretty subtle. I'll turn it off and on. Right there. Maybe I'll do inner shadow 3 pixels. And the reason why is that it gives it like depth, because like a road would like have a curb edge to it. So this stroke, if we wanted to give this a curb edge, we could also give it a color. And then we could go with outside and go with something like 2. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know that it works because the problem is it works better in plan view because you don't have a perspective scale to do the stroke. But you can see the inner shadow. It does kind of create a little bit of depth, which is cool. And you can also do an inner glow. Inner glow is a way we can add some noise, a little bit of noise to the roads, and that just will soften this up a little bit. So I'm going to go, so again, you can see the noise, less noise, more noise. And that's, you know, like when you think about asphalt, you're going to get a little bit of that textured road. This is without rendering too. Now, I didn't separate the paths from the roads, which I could have done. Okay, we're going to draw some trees now. So what I'm going to do is turn that off. I think right now, if you look at it, we kind of step back for a second and you go, okay, Eric, you did all that work and we didn't get very far, you know? It's like, yeah, we got some buildings and we got some roads, but I mean, is it really that much more than what you got if you just exported straight from SketchUp and just called it a day? Oh, we have some shadows. And, you know, oh, we should have shadows on the edges of our buildings. How come they're not there? Let's see. Oh, hang on one second. Let me check my shadows. Didn't I get shadows on the edges of my buildings? There should be. Oh, I know why. Huh, okay. User error. When I bring my lines in, the lines are also coming in with faces, so you need to set those to multiply. So I'm going to set my lines to multiply, and now I can see that I have shadows along the faces as I thought I should. And I can play with the nice thing about having the lines or edges separately is I can play with the amount of information there. Cool. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Let's throw some color on it. So I'm going to bring my aerial in, but I'm going to bring it in for reference. What I want to do right now is just give the whole thing a tone. So because this is probably summertime, it's fairly dry, I'm just going to give it like a pretty neutral, like tan base as like our base color. So if I were to turn the aerial off, I would have some tone rather than just white. Probably a good point, probably a good idea to save this. Poly rendering. And we are going to start to color using this aerial. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to draw some trees in. And the reason why is because when we have trees drawn in, it can save us a lot of time because it blocks what's on the ground plane. And so what I'm going to do is start by creating a couple of layers. And I'm going to call this trees, lines. And I'm going to add a color overlay to them. And the reason why I'm color overlaying this is because when I draw, I sometimes will bounce around on different tags. And I want to make sure that when I draw trees, I'm drawing them on this tree tag. So I'm doing trees. I'm going to do trees, but I'm going to do them pretty loose, meaning I'm going to be pretty loosey-goosey. This is a master planning aerial, so I don't want to go too detailed unless I zoomed in and I was only working on like the campus core. And I don't have trees in 3D, so I'm just going to go ahead and start drawing trees in. And this is where you, again, you guys are probably thinking, oh, Eric, you know, you could just use AI for this and that could do it a lot quicker. And I'm like, yeah, that's possible. But I'm wanting to achieve a particular look, which is a look that I've sort of developed over the years for myself. That for better, for worse is, you know, I think it works. So what I want to do is, I'm not going to do all of these with you today. I mean, we're live streaming, so I guess you guys could pop off and come back. Or if you're watching this after it's recorded, you can just scrub, because I might be doing this for, I mean, this might take 15 minutes if I'm actually drawing every tree by hand. You can see I'm not worried about whether it's like a palm tree or not. Like if I knew there was a significant like old oak tree, or there was like street trees that were quite a bit larger, I might do them differently, but I'm really just looking at the size of the canopy from the aerial that we exported. And if it's a large canopy, like maybe that's a big tree that's like a specimen tree that's been there for a while. And if I don't see that, then I'll just call it like a typical street tree, like something that you would, I think of like an average tree size, like 30 by 30, kind of like, it's pretty typical if I had to just pick like a tree. You can tell some of the ones that are quite a bit bigger. And I'll do I'll do a bunch of these so you can get a sense of the flavor, but I don't need to do every single one right now because you'll have to watch me. Again, I'm doing this on, I'm using a layer style. It's called a color overlay in Photoshop. And the reason why is because I will sometimes also draw in stuff that's missing. For example, I'm going to call this sketch lines. So I have tree lines, and I have my, or no, it might be called something like, because they're both sketches. So base lines. So my baselines, I would come over here and I would give it a different color. And the reason why is because I don't want 50 layers, but I do want, for example, I'm going to draw cars. You know, I might draw some cars in the parking lot, or I might come in and draw some information that's missing. Like, I don't have any of this like landscape stuff. Maybe there's the parking lots. I'll come in and draw all this stuff. Maybe there's a flagpole or water fountain. So if there's stuff that's missing, I'm going to hand draw those in. And I do want to keep my line work from my trees separate. And the reason why is because if I mess up, like for example, this tree here, and I want to go and I got to go, oh crap, I got to erase that. I don't want to erase everything underneath it. I just want to erase the tree. And so in this case now I can just switch back with the same brush, and I know I can put that tree back in. So I always know it doesn't matter what my brush color is, because otherwise if my brush has to be a certain color, then I'm always going back in and checking, and I don't want to do that. This color, by having the brushes be colors, it tells me very quickly which layer I'm drawing on without thinking. And I think in this case, that's important. No questions from the chat. You guys are quiet today. That's okay. It's either early for some of you, late for others. Anybody have the day off today? Because we could be doing a lot of things with the day off, working around the house, hanging out with kids, going to the movies. So this would be something where I would want to figure out, like, okay, cool. I can use the line work. Again, I have the hard and the good and hard part is I have information now from the aerial. I have information from the model, geometry, and I could sort of decide which pieces I want to use, because I want to kind of fill in some of this stuff. I want to fill in like all these plazas and things, and there's a pool here and a little terrace and a little clubhouse. None of that stuff is going to show because I didn't have that information. Maybe there's a trail that didn't show up as geometry, you know, that I want to just kind of draft in. So let's pause for a second and let's add some colors and some shadows so we can start to get a sense of what this looks like, what I'm doing. So I'm going to pull the aerial into its own group. I'm going to call that background because I may or may not keep it at the end of the day. Call that, let's give that a color so that it's easier for me to see what's in the background. So by turning that off, I'm turning the aerial off, and then I can see pretty quickly, hanging out with dogs, working on an extension. Oh, fun. Yes, dogs can be, usually have my coworker sitting right here behind me, but not today. So I'm going to throw some color on these trees. And again, whether I want to do it with whether I want to have a toned background or not is kind of up to me. So I'm going to switch brushes. One thing I didn't talk about is the fact that when I draw with square brushes in Photoshop. And the reason for that is because a square brush in Photoshop, if you hold Shift, like if you're trying to do straight lines, you can hold Shift and you get a straight line. And if you have a non-square brush, if you hold Shift, if you're using the Cintiq, maybe not for this particular brush, but when it's fatter, yeah, that's actually okay. Maybe I just learned something new. Sometimes you get the pressure, like for example, it's not with this brush, but some brushes are pressure sensitive. So if you're using a tablet, you got to kind of think about which brush you're drawing with and whether you want that pressure sensitivity to show up as like an amenity, or whether like if you're doing straight lines, that pressure sensitivity is going to screw you up. So kind of why I don't do that. So I'm going to come in here and make this a little bit bigger, make this like 8 pixels, maybe 9 pixels. And now this is where we get to have a little bit of fun. We want to look at this color, normal, our lines. We have to decide our lines. We may want to pull our lines below the trees. And the reason why is that if you color here with the tree, technically these trees are going to be in front of like our building geometry. So for example, if you had the lines on top, then they would be like full saturation coming through. And the other thing we want to do is look at the shadows. You probably want to pull the shadows up so that the trees that I'm coloring, in the shadows are darker and the trees that are being hit by the light are lighter. And if you're really OCD and if you're working on like a smaller scale and not something that's so far out like I am here, you might also come in here and select your tree color. And then later at the end, go back in and delete shadows. Like for example, this tree right here, that I just deleted, it is in front of that building shadow that's being cast behind. So if you're being really particular, you may want to change that. Wouldn't it have been more helpful to draw vegetation vectorally and not as raster? Draw it as on a vector in Photoshop? I think that's for Illustrator. I don't think it helps you here in this case, Mihai, your question, because in Photoshop everything is rastered. So in this case, if I zoom in, it's going to pixelate because we export it as PNGs and not as EPSs. So for me, when you zoom all the way out, when we're finished and we zoom all the way out, you're not going to be able to tell the difference between a vector line and a raster line. So really, to me, it comes down to like if the benefit of the vector is in what you're doing, is in how you manipulate the information, then I might have made that choice to do this a different way. Hope that answers your question. Hope I understood it correctly. Or you can explain the benefits of working with vector information in Photoshop compared to raster. So now, if all of my edges were closed, a quicker way to do this would be to go to the trees lines tag and then go what's called select inverse, and then get like a big brush, and then come in here and paint them. I can, if I was drawing more carefully, I can paint them all at once. Now here's the thing about this, is that because it's a hand drawing and it's pretty messy, number one is I didn't close the lines, so not all of these are being filled. But number two, it doesn't really bother me too much as a hand graphic to see that you're painting a little bit outside of the edges. So it really also depends on stylistically how you want it to look. Because what I might do is come in here and, like for example, if I'm doing it by hand, you can see you get these little white gaps, and it just feels more like a hand drawing, and it's not trying to read so perfect. And that's really, it really comes down to like, what is the look you're trying to achieve? And I'll show you an example. I mean, I could pause and show you an example now, or I can wait at the end, depending on how far we get together. I would love to do this whole thing, but I might spend, I might spend an entire day, or maybe even two, depending on the level of detail, the amount of design information. So you already had the green color inside the navy blue outline, but this is in Affinity. So Affinity is like that free editor, right? Mihai, that's the, that would be like the Photoshop, I don't want to say competitor, but alternative. So let's pause on the trees because I can come back to that. I do want to select the tree color, come over to the shadows, and just come in and look for areas that I know I might want to pull some of these shadows where the tree would be blocking some of the shadows. I'm being fairly particular here. You don't have to be. You may not have time to be. It may not matter at the end of the day. But I know realistically these trees would be 3D, and so the shadows may or may not be casting on them the way that they are currently. Okay, yeah, thanks, Mihai. I think definitely, definitely use whatever tool works for you. Like when I say this is what I use, it's a combination of it's what I've taught myself and what I know, and it's also what has worked in the past. So it may not necessarily be the only solution. What I'm gonna do is come over here and do base color. I'm bouncing around a little bit. I mean, I do bounce around when I do this, when I have done this in the past. But, I wouldn't maybe bounce around quite so much. It helps to kind of stick to an area. So I'm gonna turn my shadows off for a second. I'm going to come over to I created a new layer underneath my base line work, and I'm just going to look for anything that looks like lawn. And in Campus, there's probably going to be a lot of areas that would fall into that. And this would have to also be, let's see here. I may want to pull that below my roads layer because I was kind of being lazy and I put the roads and the paths on the same layer. So what I want to do is I don't have a palette for this, but I might want to do something like lawn that maybe isn't like native planting that isn't irrigated. So I would think about some of the different landscape areas that you might see on a college campus. So for example, or I might want to do something like a darker version of the lawn. This would be like for a planting bed. I have to be careful a little bit that I'm not competing too much with the color of the trees. Otherwise, if there's not enough contrast, they won't pop. But there might be an area that's like a planted garden. Of course, on a college campus, there's also going to be a lot of hardscape as well. So really, if you have a palette that you want to work with, you can kind of establish that first. Like I'm just kind of thinking in my head here, maybe areas next to buildings. I use this lighter green, or I use like more of a tan color to represent like walkways and plazas. And I'm just at this point kind of making this up. And then areas where I know people are gathering. You'll notice I'm not creating multiple layers for green plaza because then all of a sudden every time I'm painting I have to switch back and forth between those different layers. And I don't want to have to do that. So instead, what I'm just doing is a sampling from what's already there in the model. And then I would just come over here and just grab it and say that's plaza. I'm just going to call this whole thing plaza. And I'm just looking at the aerial. And remember, when you have the trees in there, then you're going to be covering. That's why I was saying like do the trees first, because it might buy you a little bit of time. And then I might come over here and do a color that's more grayish. And this could be a parking lot. Now I know I've got my aerial there now, but if I turn the aerial off, you know, I want something that's maybe not quite as dark as the road, but like almost but so differentiate it a little bit from the road. I keep sorry, keep like hitting the wrong thing. No, it's too dark. Let's lighten that up a little bit. Okay. Yeah, so if I know I've got these parking lots here, I might come in and just get a color that's slightly lighter than the roads. Paint those in. It's really like at the aerial scale, the master planning scale, it's really like more like a figure ground drawing than anything else. Like you're squinting your eyes and you're just kind of saying, okay, I think that is paved, so I'm making it this color. I think that is plaza, so I'm going to make it this color. I think that is landscaped, so I'm going to make it this color. With the college campus too, you got to imagine that parking is a huge challenge and a huge need. It's also ugly, but is what it is. Necessary evil. So I'm kind of like take a step back. Again, I kind of will do a little bit, and I used to paint murals, and sometimes when you're like really close at it like this, and you spend a bunch of time just staring right at it, you sort of miss, I don't know, I don't want to say like miss anything, but you don't really know what you're doing so much. Yeah, make that a little greener. Yeah, so it depends on the green. I don't want too many greens. I really just kind of wanted like 3 greens. I want sort of like green that's irrigated, and then I want like a green that maybe is less irrigated or non-irrigated that you might find. So again, like wherever I think people are going to be gathering, I'm going to say that's going to be more irrigated, and then wherever like people aren't, it's probably going to be less. So maybe in there, entries to buildings. Now again, if this was my design, if I was working on this, I would say I know exactly what color it needs to be because it's my project. So I would design it the way that I want it rendered, versus what I'm doing right now is looking at what's there and saying like, that kind of looks like that might be a lawn. The other thing, of course, is you could go side by side. We could come over here back to Google Earth if it's easier, because remember, I'm looking at it at an angle from a distance. So like if sometimes what I'll do is if I'm working on an area like this, I might zoom in this area. And if it's really important to get it right, I would keep that like really close on one screen. I had 2 monitors, and I would work in this area and I would paint it to what I see. And then I would move it to another area and go, oh, this is all dirt or soil, or this is all rocks, and this is all native vegetation. And again, at an aerial scale, it's sort of like depends on what you think shows up and what matters. So let's do a little bit more, and then I want to pause and take a kind of a step back and look at it and see how it's starting to come together. Again, I'm painting everything on one layer, which is the color, just the color layer. Okay. Maybe that's like less irrigated landscape. Again, if I wanted to highlight this entry road here, like this ring road, I might, even if it's not irrigated like this is a diagram. So if I really wanted to kind of emphasize this road, I might put an accent color or a bright lawn color. I don't know how interesting this is to you guys to watch, because it's sort of like it's like Bob Ross, you know. I mean, I think it's interesting to watch him paint his little trees. And he kind of talks about it along the way. So let's pause for a second, and then let's just kind of see how that's coming together. And Sometimes what you can do is you can take the saturation out of the aerial and you can create a brightness contrast adjustment layer and pull that contrast up really high. And that way it kind of gives you just a really soft ground plane. Excuse me. It gives you kind of like just a soft ground plane. So if you don't draw everything, there's still some texture in there that you can see. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the color overlay. Let's pretend that I'm finished. So what I would do is come in and I would pick the color that I want for my trees, and I would pick the colors that I want for my ground plane. And I would just go in and, because ultimately I'm not going to have them be purple and, and dark blue, turn my shadows back on, and we can start to get a sense of where this is going. Let me double check and see here where my edges are. My edges, I can pull those up a little bit if I want. I can pull those back a little bit. Same thing, I can bring in a color, just a tone, really subtly, so that makes those buildings pop a little bit. And then, and the other thing that I haven't done is I could, and I'll show you, let's go back into SketchUp for a second, is if I were to look at my line work, and let's say, for example, the important part of the master plan is like this central quad area, like inside of this loop road. So if that's the case, I could come over here and just bring my buildings I'm going to call this campus core, go into my buildings tag, and I'm just going to select everything. In fact, if I go to color by tag would be better. Campus core, give that a color. And then I'm just going to basically, anything that I want, in this case, a building that I want to emphasize, I could do this in Photoshop by hand, or I could come over here and say, no, I don't want to hand draw over my buildings. I want to do this. Select all in the same tag, group it, copy it, delete it, get out of the buildings group, and paste that. Okay, so now what I would have is I could turn everything off except for, in this case, my campus core. Let me do that again. Should have done that as my line work. So in this case, what I could do is I could take just the buildings that I'm interested in, and I can export those separately. And I'm just going to call this buildings, campus core, call it whatever you want, emphasis, accent, proposed. If this was a real project, I would probably have existing and proposed. So I would have those separately, but I don't in this case. So I'm going to find campus core, buildings, there they are. Pop that in. Okay. And those should pop in because I didn't scale it. They should pop. Oh, they popped in a slightly different scale. I don't remember scaling it. That's okay. Okay, we'll just do that. So now I have these buildings here that are, I'm going to copy this layer style, paste the layer style, and I'm also going to put a stroke on them. So for example, I might want to come in here and I might want to add a stroke around them. So that they pop a little bit more than everything else. Or depending on how I did this, if I was doing this as a land use plan, I could come over here and put a color overlay on them, multiply the color down, and then maybe do something like a terracotta, like something you would see like in a Spanish, like, you know, again, if it was I'm just making this up, but I'm showing you that like we can draw your eye to whatever we want to draw. So any buildings that are now on that building tag, on this what was a building tag in SketchUp, but exported separately from everything else, can not only have those thicker edges, but can also have a color applied to them. What I kind of want though is actually almost just like, no, I don't want to do that. It's just the roofs. So that's pretty cool. So I'm going to pause there and see, do you guys have any other questions about, I noticed my head is kind of blocking some of the Photoshop layers, and sorry about that. Yeah, but if you got any questions, let me know. Got my base color, got my color by tag, which I could just do a color overlay if I wanted to. Nope, don't want to do that. Actually, the roads, actually, I think would look better if they were darkened a little bit. Darken those up a little bit. And then I'm just going to kind of speed this up a little bit. I'm going to add just kind of a base fill color here underneath my accent color. Don't need my dock for that. Goodbye, dock. And we're just going to call this color fill. I don't want to fill the whole thing. I'm just going to kind of pick a color that I can control separately from my detailed color fill. And my shadows, my shadows, yeah, I want to make sure that they're multiplying correctly. So I might have to pull those out. My buildings, my edges, baseline. And let's see here. I'm trying to keep it simple. Trying to keep things fairly simple. There we go. Let's do like this color fill here. I'm just going to kind of come in and just add some color. Just as like a background color. And again, it depends on where we want to sort of extend the scope of work to. Like, yeah, maybe I want to come in and delete. Maybe I want to show like this parking area not as part of it. So I'm just kind of like, there we go. So you can see that by just playing with the contrast, when we have a white background, the white buildings don't pop. But now that we have some color fill, you can start to see that come together. This is the fun, but also the challenge of when we do this process, when we're doing this as in theory rather than in reality. It's sort of like, where do we draw the line? And we call it good, because at some point what we're going to be doing is sort of repeating a lot of these key steps rather than introducing any new ones. So like for me, I might come in and figure out where the campus boundary is. I don't know why I'm using my mouse for this. That is silly. I'm going to color that in. And I think like once we get into, I don't know, I'm going to pretend like that's our boundary. It may not be. I would have to, if this was my project, I would know where our boundary is. Maybe I want to pick up these dorms. Yeah, so I kind of want like something that acts like more as a grounds, like almost like as a boundary that sort of says, hey, we know where to stop and start. So now in the base color fill, I'm going to turn that off. Let's turn the background on. Okay, so I'm going to Sometimes I will use the lasso tool instead of actually drawing something like by hand. If I don't have line work for it, it might actually be quicker and it's a little loose, and that's okay. Use the lasso tool and just punch that in. And within that, grab some green, punch that in. This is the football stadium, so football field. I think I'm going to put that all as green. Actually, I'll probably do that as 2 greens. I'll probably do that as a darker green around the edges here. Yeah. This is where we get to kind of be as loose as we want. Can kind of be as tight or as loose as we feel like we want to be, as we have time to be. Probably should have used this green that I had here. So I'm going to select that and gradient that on there. And then I'm going to grab our football field green. I'll gradient that. And I'm going to pop that in there. A little bit of contrast. This is where it gets fun too. Like if you were doing this as a, you could also create a layer with some lines, and we can go to, we can either do a color overlay or we can just do white, and you could just put, you know, if this is a football field, I don't know what, I actually don't know. I have to turn this off. I'm kind of close. Put that in there. Maybe there's something in here we could come in. So if you have color, sometimes it helps to, instead of using a dark color, we can use a light color and fill in some of those details. I want to do some more trees because I miss doing my trees. So I'm going to do some trees to fill in some of this. So I think I used 2 as the size of my trees. I'm going to turn my color off so I can see what I'm doing. We're going to do this. I'm going to do about 10 more minutes. So if you're with me, I appreciate it. And just for those watching at home, it would take me a couple hours, I think, to finish this properly. And I don't know if you want to sit with me for a couple hours. I imagine that, especially if it's getting late for you, if you're in the East Coast, or if you're in Europe, UK. So what I'm going to do is just do enough trees in this core area, and then I'm going to do some shadows, and we'll put some filter effects on it, and we're going to call it a day. You guys seen the process. We started just 2 hours ago with, less than 2 hours ago, with nothing. Started with absolutely nothing. And we will not have a finished aerial rendering, but we will have the campus core rendered, and we will have all the component pieces that we need to finish this rendering. Meaning that I would just continue to do this process for longer, for another couple hours, and maybe I will, you know, maybe I will spend my day off finishing this, or maybe I'll call it. We'll see. But you get the idea, and I think that's the important part for me, is to get the idea across. You know, and I'm not going to rant about it right now because I'll save it for a more organized conversation later, but obviously there's a lot of interest on AI. There's a lot of fears. There's a lot of excitement. These are one of those things where you can say, there's no reason to do this, Eric. You know, you can just plug it in. I can have this done in 30 seconds, maybe, if you have some good source information and you know what prompt you're using. You might be able to get a decent output. But what I've found is, through playing around and testing, aerials are more difficult than ground levels. with AI because there's a lot more information they have to guess to get right. Whereas a ground level, I think it can take a lot more. It understands perspective, people scale. An aerial is sort of like, is that a pool of water? Is that an overhang building? Does the building go into the slope? Is it a parking ramp? It has no idea. So one thing I can say is that by doing this process by hand, you maintain control over every element of what we're doing, from the edge thickness to the edge color to the shadow depth to the shadow softness to the shadow color to the building heights. We are aware of everything that's in here because we put everything in here ourselves. There should not be anything in this aerial that I'm not aware of, that I didn't choose specifically to do. And I don't know, I think there's something to be said for that, of like, I think that accuracy is worth more than we're giving it credit for. I also think the ability for you to be able to control, which is flexibility, so this adaptability and flexibility, to make changes, whether that's while you're building it or changes later when someone says, I don't like this, that doesn't work. I think that's worth more than we're currently valuing it at. And maybe perhaps someday we will change our minds and we'll come around and we'll say, hey, we didn't really value it then as much as we should have, and we do now. What are you saying? Working the design by hand gives you the feel or the job rather than plopping something in front of you. Yeah. This is the... And the other thing is yeah, to your point, to your comment, I think that there's a level of care when you are engaged in your work, whether it's by hand or even not hand. Remember, we used to have this argument about whether digital is better, old school hand drawing is better. Well, you can see this process I'm using here. This is a hybrid approach. So it's like, is this better? Is rendering in V-Ray better? It's not better. It's just, what do you want to communicate? I want to communicate, I want this hand-drawn look. I like this hand-drawn look. I like the control. I like the flexibility. I like all those things. I want this, and I'm choosing to do this. It's intentional. So there's an intentionality with when we show up to do our job, and we show up to present in front of a client, and we show up with purchasing software, that we are making these intentional decisions. And as we go and as we progress the work, it is labor. It's a labor of love. We choose this. If you're in the environmental design field, or you're in the education field, or construction, or even if you're a hobbyist, there's a chance that you're using SketchUp or you're drawing in Photoshop like I am. There's a good chance that you're not just trying to get as much output out as quick as possible, that you actually like what you do and you chose to do it. Yeah. Said I wasn't going to rant. I hope that wasn't a rant. That was a little bit more than I thought I would share, but to me, I don't see the time this takes as a problem. That's kind of what I'm trying to say. It's not a problem. It's not a problem to be solved. If you're on a deadline, there's two things you can do. Let me give you an example here. So push back on me. You're on a deadline. I don't have time to do this. My boss says I need to get it out. That's my intern voice. My boss says I got to get it out. I only have, I have till tomorrow to do it. Well, let me tell you, one thing that makes things go quick is having experience. The more you do something, the more you play with something, the more you test different things, the more you try it, the more you've done it. When you've done 50 of these, or 20 of them or 10 of them, you can sit there and say, I know what to expect because I know how long this takes. I know where I can cut corners and where I can't. I know where I need help and where I don't, because you've done it so many times. You know what to expect. So that is one way to save time, is that you don't come into this blindly thinking this is going to take, I don't know what I'm doing. This is going to take me so long. It's like, no, I know what I'm doing. I know how long this is going to take. I knew that I could not do this justice in 2 hours with you live here today. I knew that I'm not going to finish. And I'm sitting here using my AI speech as an excuse to talk while I draw more trees, because I want more trees. But do you know what I mean? Like, I didn't come into this thinking, oh my gosh, like, I don't want to do this. This is going to take so long. Like, I knew what I was getting into. So the only way you get that experience is by doing it. You can try shortcutting it. You can try shortcutting it, but you're doing yourself a disservice. What I've found that if you're going to shortcut the process, you should shortcut it after having done it, at least, because then you can say, I know which aspects I want to shortcut and why. I know that this part of the process doesn't gain me value by doing it by hand. This part of the process can and should be optimized and automated. But the only way you have that experience to make that judgment call is having put in the hard work, having done the work. And then you can say, oh my gosh, I hate drawing trees. There's so many trees. I've trained an algorithm to read the Google map, and it will read what's in there, and it will do a pretty good job within 90% accuracy, and it will get it fairly close. It'll get it good enough for what I need it for. So I can move on to the part that I really enjoy doing, coloring, adding shadows, adding filter effects, presenting to the client, whatever it is. I'm going to pause there on the trees because I think this is enough to get my point across. I wanted to end where I have like enough information so that you can really kind of feel like it's starting to come together. And if I don't do that, then I don't know. I'm not, I feel like I'm doing you all a disservice. So let's try that trick. I'm going to select my tree lines first. I will try and shortcut this a little bit. And then I'm going to select inverse. And then I'm going to paint that onto my tree color. So that way, all the ones that I closed, I saved that little bit of time of having to color those by hand. Now, the other reason why I'm not copying and pasting, I could copy and use clone stamp and go copy, is then it's going to look really uniform. It's going to look really rigid because it looks like the same tree copied over and over again. And the reality is I don't want that look. Remember, I'm making this intentional choice to do this fast, to do this loose, because it's the look, it's the aesthetic that I want, because this is the aesthetic that I've built over time, having done this in the past. And it may not be, your choice. It may not be your preference, and that's okay. And that's okay. But at the same time, you could use the techniques that I'm showing you, and you could put your spin on them. So this idea of gathering data, consolidating data, setting up stylistic templates, exporting pieces of the model in controllable layers. A lot of this stuff carries through, even if stylistically you want to change your approach. I don't mind coloring because I don't know if you guys know this, but one of my favorite things to do when I was a little kid, was color. And draw, was literally just draw and color. There was a grocery store. I don't know if you guys, sometimes they still do this, but I remember the grocery store by my parents' house growing up, sometimes they would do coloring contests. It would be like Easter or Christmas or something like that. And they would have just a white sheet of, like a printout. And you could take them home and color it, and they would pin them up. So you could go see your coloring. And I just thought like, oh, heck yeah. I get to sit and I get to color. And then when you think about it for a while, as an urban designer, it's like you can think, oh, my job is to, yes, my job ultimately is to get a project built. My job ultimately is to get policy influenced or policy context explained visually so it can be approved or implemented. But you can also pause along the way and say, it's pretty cool that I get paid. Not so much at the moment, but in the past, that I would get paid to do these kinds of drawings. Like, sounds pretty good. Okay, so I'm gonna switch gears for a second before we wrap up, and I'm gonna add, you'll notice one thing is because anything that we drew in Photoshop, is not gonna have, like these trees, it's not gonna have shadows associated with them. So what I'm gonna do is come here and just put my tree line color back to black or charcoal gray. I'm gonna grab the same kind of purple color that I used here, and I'm going to set that to multiply. And you don't have to do this, but I think it helps add depth. Again, this is, oh, hang on. This should be set tree shadows. Should be set to multiply, normal, okay. What is it with this group that I can't get my multiply to work? I'm going to pull them out. Okay, we're going to have to do it. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just going to have to pull these out of this group. For some reason, that group is messing up with my layer style. Let me read this comment. It says, you go to the places with visualization, the cracks, the crevices, spaces, voids. They're filled with imagination. Mulling things over is when things pop. Yeah, I think about like when I made a Bob Ross reference, when he talks about like happy little trees. You know, he sits and has a conversation with himself. Really, you know, I mean, does it have to be this way? Should it be this way? And we get to have like a little conversation with ourselves. We get to play, I get to play, God's not the right term, but I get to play, you know, city builder like Sims. I get to decide, oh, I want to put the trees, I want to put more trees here. I want to pop the grass color so that your eye goes to the event lawn, which is where I'm hoping that people will gather. Oh, we're putting a new bicycle path in. That's really cool. It gives kids on campus an alternative to commuting by car. That's really important. It's one of my values. It's a big value of mine. So I get to figure out, I get to sit there and say, how can I use this drawing process to sort of filter information so that the information that I want you to also read as important comes across. So this is where it's a little bit tedious, I guess, but I'm always listening to music. Right now I'm just talking, but normally I'm listening to music. And so what I would do is just come in here and listen to some good music. I'm putting in these tree shadows now. So that's what, I'm not really explaining what I'm doing, but I think you can see it. So I might lighten the shadows. Again, I can come back and do that later. Like, remember I talked about shadows further away from like our project core. So the shadows that are further away here, I might come in, and lighten those up, or I might just leave it. Probably just for today, leave it. So like that way it's like the color, like the more saturated the color is, it's going to be towards the center frame. That's why I kind of chose earlier when we were thinking about the composition, I was looking at this sort of this area with this loop road and then like the big university quad lawn. Like, okay, that's sort of like the center of the image. And that's kind of what I wanted to use there. So let's throw a few more shadows and then we'll get ready to maybe couple of filter effects and we'll wrap it up. So I always have to remind myself which direction the shadow is going, and it's going left to right, slightly at a diagonal. So I'm just kind of got my hand, I'm just kind of scribbling these in here, and it's kind of going generally in that direction. Sometimes, depending on your camera angle and your height, you might have the shadows that actually move away, like you'll see almost like they're in perspective. They're moving away from the camera. So just because this from this position, they go in this direction, the way that the buildings are. You kind of want to look at the buildings and just go back and use that as like your guide. So I'm going pretty quick and dirty here, and I hope that's okay with you. So anyway, I know everyone says you got to get on the AI train, and I say you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do, that you don't believe is the right thing for you as an artist or as a creator. I'm not saying that there's not good uses, and I'm not saying there's not the right context or that it's not worth exploring and playing with. But I'm not even saying I'm skeptical or that I'm afraid. I'm saying that you do not have to do what somebody else tells you to do and say, oh, use AI tools. Because the other thing is that, remember, I have a long time ago drank the SketchUp Kool-Aid in a way where it does not come free. We know this, it comes at a cost. You purchase a subscription, and if you don't pay your subscription, you don't use it anymore. So it's a little bit scary when you build a workflow on software that somebody else owns and develops and maintains and charges you for. So at any minute, they could pull the plug on development. I don't think they're going to. So I trust SketchUp. I have, and I will continue to. But with AI companies, it's early days. I'm a little bit, that's the part that I'm skeptical about. It's not so much whether or not you should or could use it or whether it benefits you in your process, but I'm skeptical about becoming dependent on something that feels really fragile. Let me give you an example. Some people they really like ChatGPT, I think 4.0, and they built chatbot friends with them, or they built work productivity tools with it, and then OpenAI says that's an old model, we're deprecating it. And then they use the new model, and I don't like the new model. I like the way the old model worked. It made sense. It worked for what I needed it to do. I built processes and tools or friendships around an AI model, and then all of a sudden they pulled the plug on it for financial reasons or security reasons or development reasons. Usually maintenance. They don't want to maintain 12 different models. They only want to maintain, SketchUp does newest plus 2, and OpenAI is probably doing something similar. It's a little scary when if you give up, for example, you give up a SketchUp license, you give up a Photoshop license, and instead you go all in on the AI train, and all of a sudden they pull the plug or they jack the price, or start showing you ads. Those are things where that would bug me. So you can see the difference here. I know that I'm talking about other things, but you can see that sort of the difference that adding the shadow depth does. And I can toggle it on and off. Like once you've made some progress, as my Canadian friends will say, you can turn it off and on. So sometimes when I'm done here, like when I get close to being done, or when I make a significant amount of effort, I will turn it off and on, off and on. Maybe it's too dark. Maybe I can pull those back a little bit, so that it's not competing with the buildings, especially when you have tree shadows overlapping the buildings. If I pull back too much, they disappear. But I might pull it back just a little bit. The other thing you can do too is that, remember, these, unlike with SketchUp shadows, which are gray, and Colin, if you're still with me, I've been asking for a long time that we can colorize shadows. May or may not be on your roadmap, let me know. But adding colorized shadows would solve that process of exporting them black and white, because I could pick the color in SketchUp, I could save that color as a palette, and then in my style, I could build a colored shadow every time I use the same exports. So here, now that I've added a color, I can play with the saturation. So for example, I'm going to do my building shadows, and I'm going to push it way too far on purpose. Which is kind of cool, actually. It's kind of trippy. I want to pull that back, though, because remember, this is a rendering. This is a sketch concept. It's to be visually interesting. It's to call attention to something. To get approval for something. or funding for something or to win a competition. So I think it's okay to push it up a little bit. So I was kind of played it safe at first, and now I'm thinking like, oh, actually I want to push that purple color. So same thing with the tree shadows. I might come over here to saturation, pull those up on the tree shadows so that it matches. I don't want to go too far. Actually, I do really like it. I really do like the color, the purple. I think it adds a lot. So if I were to take my background out, for example, if I were to turn, maybe I'll put that in my background. Maybe you can see it a little bit better, a little bit easier. Building shadows. Oops, I keep doing that wrong thing. Push that up, push that saturation up a little bit. So it's cool because once we have these, yeah, it's pretty cool. All right, guys, I'm going to come over here to my base color, and I'm going to pop the saturation and the lightness up a little bit of my turf color. And we're just going to fill in some gaps. So we're going to come over here. We're just going to fill in some green. I'm just going to get some poppy green. You know, I'm just going to fill in some green. I know that green's not there. I'm just kind of faking it. You know, I want this to look, it's campus. You know, it's a fun place for kids to hang out. Yeah, so everything's sort of in that inner ring. I'm just going to paint that green, even if that's not the case, just to speed this, just to kind of wrap this. So we get to so I feel like we get to a good wrap up place. And then again, I've got this kind of beigeish color. I might want to pop that a little bit. That might be just my Plaza color. You know, I'm just going to strategically, sort of surgically put in some Plaza color where I think that makes sense. It's a concept. Get it. So, kind of cool. Maybe near the buildings, more hardscape. Again, if this was a proposed master plan, then I could do whatever. I would know what is the hardscape and what isn't, because I would be the one making that decision. I would say, nope, I want this to be Plaza. The other thing we might want to do is take the tree color. I want to bring that to something like 80 or 90%. And the reason why is because what it does is it lets you see the buildings behind it a little bit, so it's not so heavy. That tree line color, yeah, I think that's okay. Again, by separating the trees edges to the background edges, it just gives us that level of control. We can turn them off, we can fade them, we can make them lighter, we can make them darker. We've got quite a bit of control. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to set that to multiply and pop the lightness, saturation. I'm going to boost that up. I'm going to lighten it a little bit. There we go. And turn my contours on. Hey, where are my contours? Do you remember? Did I bring them in? I don't know. I thought I did. There they are. Okay. So let's put those up here. And let's, oh, I did bring them in, but what did I do with them? Contours. Oh, there they are. Turn them off. Okay, they're already there. So I'm gonna turn those back on. And that's cool because if I wanted to, right now I'm just gonna wrap up here. I'm gonna call it. You guys, we've gone for 2.5 hours. I know you're dropping off. I know it's late for Mihai. You had to take off. If you took off, thank you. I'm gonna pause here because you can see the process is just the same. It's what we're gonna do. What I would do is just keep filling in information. So what I want to do is just kind of take a look at it I might feel like it needs, let's go with this, watercolor paper texture. If you're doing a hand-drawn look, you might want to see, I want to say minus stock, and I want to go tools, size, large. Let's see what we can find. If we can find something that isn't, sometimes you have to have an account, sometimes you have to pay. If anything, I want to give it a credit and say thank you to the website that I got this at. So let's pop this open. Let's close this and JPEG. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this watercolor texture. Whoa, that's super small. I'm working on such a big drawing that this may not work. Multiply. Yeah, that paper probably is the wrong scale. It's probably the wrong scale. Let me see if I have any really quick. Give me a second. We're going to come over here and I'm going to check, and I've got some things on rendering resources, textures, paper. I do have some papers. Okay. I do have some papers that may or may not work. Let's find out. Let's look at this one. Watercolor texture. Well, that one's too granular. That one's too dark, too dirty. Linen. That one's okay. That one's dark too. Oh man, I don't know. We'll try it. So put a little paper texture in there. Set that to multiply. Maybe lighten that up a little bit. Come over here and bring your eye in a little bit more. Let's see why. If I take this like this, select inverse. These are like the finishing touches. I'm going to put a frame around it. And then within this frame, I'm going to draw. Let's get a pencil color and my 2 brush. I'm going to sort of draw it like that. I'm going to draw like a little, almost like I was laying out some tape. It helps if you draw it where the frame is. And then maybe you sign the corner. And tree color, little details. We're going to go ahead and fade the tree color. We're going to fade it back. I could do this with a gradient. Probably the safest thing to do would be to do it with a gradient mask. Because I want to bring your eye in. So I want to pull this tree color, and I'm using the dodge tool. Of course, if you do this, you're committed. You can't really change your mind, which is why I think it maybe makes sense that I would say do this with do this with a mask instead, but whatever. It's a holiday. It's a Monday. We're having some fun. We're just making this up as we go. It doesn't matter. It doesn't hurt anyone. It doesn't cost us anything. No one's paying us to do this. We do whatever we want. Yeah. The other thing that I've done in the past is I found these things called, where am I? Nope. There's sometimes you can add some other that's not it. Some information. The one I was looking for was a color gradient. Okay, I don't think this might be a bad idea. Sometimes you can put like a color wash on it. And like to kind of give it like an effect. So I'm kind of going through all the different like colors that you might get. And you pull this back, pull it way back. And maybe even change, you can play with changing the hue a little bit. Like the purple to yellow is kind of nice. I could do this at an angle. I could just use this. I didn't need to pull an image for this. I could have just grabbed, I could have just used a gradient, but it's something kind of nice about trying it. I'm kind of trying to match the camera angle. It's coming in like this. And of course, I try it on and off and see if that works. If it doesn't work, I dump it. I say forget it. It's just trying to add, yeah, it's just trying to like bring in some tones, some tonal variation, color burn, linear burn. I've seen it. Screen, dodge, yeah, so we could play around with those a little bit. Overlay, yeah, kind of cool. All right, you can see I'm starting to lose it. So I'm gonna stop there, you guys. I know some of you have taken off. I know that I kind of threw this up last minute, so I probably didn't get too many of you. But what I want to do with me today, but I want to thank you all for watching, whether you caught me in live or whether you caught me recorded afterwards. That this is and I do this because I think this is important. I think it's important that we all, anyone who's interested in creating these kinds of drawings, know how to do it. They know that it's possible. We don't have to run to AI. We don't have to pay a consultant. We don't need a ton of fancy tools. I used 2 tools, SketchUp and Photoshop, something that almost every designer, at least architectural designer, has, whether it's in your office or if you're in school, you have it in your computer lab. And if you don't and you want to pay for it yourself, they're both accessible. Do you need SketchUp for this? I mean, you could, yes, I think you do. But do you need Photoshop? No, I think you could probably do some of the stuff in Affinity, or you can do it in a different program. But I think Photoshop for me is, you can do it on an iPad using Procreate. So for example, that might be a little bit less expensive, more accessible if you have access to an iPad rather than a Cintiq template, not template, excuse me, tablet screen. But either way, the point is that I enjoy doing these kinds of drawings. I don't do them these days as much as I would like. And I hope you all learned something new. Remember, just one thing, just one thing. So if you did stay with me, whether you popped in late or whether you've been with me this whole time, I would love to hear from you what you did learn, if you learned something. If you didn't, actually tell me you didn't learn anything. Tell me you knew all this before. And if you learned one thing that you think was helpful, then let me know in the comments and it would help me as I go to make more of these for you. So I'm going to stop there. Thanks you all for joining me today. Have a great rest of your rainy day if you're in California, or holiday if you're in the United States, or whatever else you're doing.